Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and if you were with me 10 days ago when these bins were last fed, you might remember me making multiple references to when we would want to come back here to check in on these bins. Over and over I said, let's come back here 9 days from now so that we can check in on the older bins. The older bin is the one that's already out here on my bench. The whole idea was to come back at the point in time yesterday when the bin would have reached its 300 days in service, but I got a little bit busy yesterday, and I just couldn't really get around to doing it. So here we are at the 301st day in service, which is fine because 301 days is actually 43 weeks, a nice round number nonetheless. It's exactly 43 weeks in service now. And the bin right below it, the one we're going to be feeding next, the one with my original worms in it, that's now 280. That would be 40 weeks, right? 40 weeks plus 3 days. So 43 weeks, 40 weeks and some change. We've been looking at the contents of these bins for a couple feedings now, thinking to ourselves, man, this stuff is really coming along nicely. Very mature material. Here and there we still see some small leaf stems floating around, making us wonder if, maybe letting the systems continue for a little while longer might be a good idea. And I guess in the interest of not allowing additional materials to be thrown in here that would take a long time to break down, we've been giving them stuff that's almost certain to get broken down quite quickly. So it's these little leaf stems that are what I often consider to be sort of the measure of how close to done I am. So each of these little leaf stems is extremely fragile, breaks apart. Even this thicker one right here in my hand breaks really easily. And I mean, yeah, here and there you're going to find some fragments of this and that as well, but the material for the most part is coming along really nicely. So the stuff we gave them last time was coffee, and I've got more coffee for them again today. And there was some worm chow sprinkled in with the coffee. And the whole idea with that was that it's all very bite-sized stuff, and we threw kind of an experimental material in here too, which was the skins of some almonds. And I questioned whether the stuff would be interesting enough to the worms that they would eat it up, but I was uncertain, so I kept it all kind of in the same place together. And that's why you see it sort of piled up over here in a single spot, so that if we decided we wanted to extract it and do away with it, perhaps because it seemed like the worms weren't really taking to it, then we could easily do that. And I'm thinking that it might be a good idea to continue with that same thinking, is to keep this stuff together, because I gotta tell you, I don't see a whole lot of progress on this stuff. So I mean, it doesn't mean they're not eating it, but if the stuff is going to become just litter within a nice batch of almost finished castings, it almost seems like it would be better to keep it together so that it would be easy enough to extract later. Geez, what do we do? Do we... Yeah, kind of going on and on here. We haven't even seen any worms yet. So I'm thinking that I'm going to, not let that faze me. We had talked about maybe setting this system up for migration already on this next go around today. But I did bring down some actual large size foods again for them, which includes even some leaves on the strawberries and carrot peels. Maybe we just treat this as yet another everyday feeding, and we just continue on with these worms for just a little bit longer, despite the fact that the castings that they're living in does seem quite finished at this point. For a couple feedings now, we've not, or I don't even remember, I think the last feeding we did not have like a distinct feeding zone like we normally do, where we excavate a pit across the middle of the bin. We had actually spread the coffee and worm chow out almost the entire surface. And then we put some of this almond skin in here as sort of a test. We also had a couple pieces of paper. And I am starting to think to myself that maybe we can just go a little bit longer here rather than trying to initiate the movement of the worms out of the material. We'll just go ahead and we'll give them these delicious food items, the strawberry and the carrot peels, and the coffee and the worm chow, and then revisit the idea of trying to harvest their castings and relocate the worms at a later time. I mean, a lot of people might be saying, oh, the poor worms, let them get out of this stuff already, move them into something fresh, make better use of their, their efforts. But I'm okay with prolonging the lifespan of these systems a little bit longer. I'm not in a particular rush. So yeah, why don't we do that? I'm going to just create a little bit of a pit over here into where we can drop today's feeding. And I mean, maybe another thing to do would be to grab all of this almond skin here and place it right beneath where the food's going to be positioned. How does that sound? Maybe it'll just sort of incidentally get broken down since it's in the proximity of the delicious strawberry and carrot. And maybe we can just help the stuff get to that finish line point rather than just hoping that the worms happen upon it and take a shine to it. So I guess just for future reference, almond skins don't appear to spark the interest of the worms as I had hoped it would, but I really didn't know. So it was a little bit of a test. And why don't we go ahead and give them their portion for today. I haven't gone very deep. The food that we're putting in is kind of going to be near the surface here. I'm also going to use this as an opportunity to till up the material down here. Now, we did actually put in a couple coffee filters before we piled in the coffee and the almond skins, and most of it seems to be gone. We found a little fragment of it right here. But it does seem like having some carbon-based food alongside the nitrogen-rich kitchen scraps might be a good idea too. And since the bedding in general in here is running pretty low, I figured I would also throw just a piece of paper in here beneath the foods so that it could be there for the worms should they sense the need for it. And I got a feeling they probably do need it, so that'll probably be a good idea to give it to them. So let's see, this stuff is frozen into kind of a block, but luckily it's going to break apart pretty easily, I believe. Let's see about giving them about half of what's in here. Throw a little bit of this carrot in for them too. Combine it, and let's see, maybe just another couple strawberries, and then still want to account for the fact that we're adding some coffee and worm chow in here as well. So, pretty nice feeding. Sprinkle on some coffee, we'll sprinkle on some worm chow. And then the next time we come in here, maybe we can revisit the concept of one of these feedings, one of these days being the last feeding, and maybe initiating the phase of foraging, which usually to me just means letting the worms kind of explore the material, try to pick off any lingering bits of leftovers that still exist within the material. I mean, there is a good degree of moisture within this stuff, but it luckily breaks apart kind of readily. Little bits of it seem like they're holding together a little bit more than I would like them to. I'd like the stuff to be a bit more granular, but we're not going to sweat it too much right now. I suppose we would have the option to allow this system to dry off a bit more if we were really driving towards harvest in earnest, but I think we're going to stick with just letting them enjoy this pretty high degree of moisture I see in this material for now. And at some point in the near future, we'll go ahead and really start gearing this system up for harvest. I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, hey, geez, look at all those castings. There's hardly anything for these worms to, live in other than their poop. And you're absolutely right. I'm not going to deny you that. And it would be great to cut them loose on some nice fresh bedding and a whole new environment. put this batch of castings into storage. But I'm not in a particular rush. I think we'll be fine if we just wait maybe another feeding or two before we jump into doing that. So we did definitely hint at that being in the cards for this system soon, but today's just not going to be that day, I think. So that's where we stand right now, and I don't have, well, do I? I often put something right over where we feed, usually a coffee filter as a kind of a feeding zone indicator. And you know what? I actually do have a couple coffee filters right here. So why don't we go ahead and give them that too, just in case there is a dire need for some sort of a carbon-rich food source to balance out all those yummy food scraps in there. Because the food scraps, the kitchen scraps, generally classify as a more nitrogen-rich food item. And then, you know, some sort of bedding material, paper, leaves, whatever, would register as the carbon balance to that. So there is always a good idea to keep balance between the nitrogen and carbon content of what your worms are provided. All right, let's get the other bin fed. That's the bin with the original worms in it. All right, let's get to feeding them next. You know, when I have buddy bins like these two paired up, I do treat the first system as sort of my exploratory system, but since they are buddy bins and they're being managed in a way that's meant to keep the two systems in sync to a certain degree, so at this point I'm going to try to just carbon copy what I did in the first bin and just reflect that in here as our game plan. So I think we're going to do just that. We'll make sure we've tilled up the entire contents. We'll drop in the food we've got for them down the middle. We'll give them a feeding zone indicator, which can be sort of a carbon supplement on top, and the carbon supplement down in the feeding area can be the paper towel like the other bin got as well as some of this residual paper here, which we can drop into the feeding zone once we're done. There's a cocoon right there. Probably didn't see it, but I spotted it immediately. All right. So you know what? Let's reverse the order here. Let's do the quick tilling of the outer edges of the bin first. See how things look. From a moisture perspective, things in here might not be quite as damp as I saw on the other one. And you know, as long as we're going to be placing the feeding right down the middle, if I see any large scraps of leftover food like this banana peel stem that I just extracted, then what I could do is sort of collect those up and make sure they're all centralized in the middle too. And I got a feeling we're going to see all those leftover almond peels in here as well when we get to the middle area. So we'll see about trying to keep that stuff together too, to focus it in the middle alongside the delicious carrot and strawberry feeding they're getting today, so that perhaps it'll get the attention it deserves and get broken down. All right, a good number of worms hanging out here together, partying, enjoying something, I don't know what. Kind of makes me wonder, did we just bump into the feeding zone? It looks like a coffee filter, so we may have. But none of the stuff they got last time seems like it would be lingering 10 days later, all that coffee and worm chow. It just seemed to me the feeding they got last time was so dispersed that we wouldn't really encounter any worm balls today, but it was weird. I just kind of stuck my fingers down into the material here, and it seemed like there was some sort of a worm party going on right down here. Just makes me wonder what it is that they're so jazzed about. Ah, you know what? Nope. Thought I found something large, but I didn't. There's just little scraps of this and that here and there. Interesting. Well, whatever. We'll get to exploring the middle a little bit more thoroughly when we open up the center to drop in their feeding and to try to collect all those almond peels, but let's really quickly give this opposite outer edge a quick till, just to make sure everything's aerated, and if nothing else, to just give ourselves a sense of how the material looks from a moisture perspective. A little bit clumpy, a little bit sticky, but certainly not too bad. breaks apart when I start handling it. I guess at some point down the road we'll maybe try to promote a little bit of drying in this system by leaving the top coverings either loosely fitted so they're not as thoroughly covering the top surface, or maybe even off for a round between feedings or between check-ins or whatever the case may be. But I think we're set here now to extract the almond, assuming we're going to find almond in here. I think we're gonna. It seems almost inevitable, since that's what we encountered when we went into the feeding zone of the other system. It's just interesting how the worms are really out here in great numbers, unlike the other system. And it was really weird with the almond peels in the other system. Here's one. They were already like kind of poking through the top surface. I could see them already even before excavating in the other system. Here, it just seems unusual that one batch of worms would appreciate that stuff and gobble it all up, whereas the other system has no interest in it and just leaves it there. So strange. It almost does seem like the almond peel did get eaten here, unless maybe I submerged it deeper here, because I'm now finally encountering some of it here. 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces, plus that piece that I extracted earlier. Here's what appears to be another piece of it. But this one actually has a worm in it, or on it. So something tells me we are gonna bump into the almond peel along the way here. The only reason I'm kind of picking it out a little bit is because I would like to try to get it in right next to the carrot and strawberry feeding, so that the stuff gets perhaps a little more attention than it would otherwise. And I sure hope it doesn't end up just becoming litter within the nice batch of castings. But like I said, we can always extract it, eliminate it by screening the material, so we don't have to go too crazy seeking it all out. But I think it is starting to pile up now. It is pretty evident that these worms didn't do away with that stuff either. The stuff is, well, maybe, who knows, maybe another 10 days and the microbial infiltration will get to the point where the worms can finally start nibbling on it, but maybe it's just too soon for that. 'Cause certain foods are nice and soft and gooey, and worms can rip right into some of those types of foods, but other foods really require the worms to hang on until it decomposes to the point where they can move in and take over. So perhaps this is just one of those sort of materials or foods. So we did position the feeding a little bit closer to the surface, but before we apply the food, I figured we would just do a quick tilling of the material right beneath the feeding area. The tilling is really, I guess, driven by a desire to aerate and just examine. But that's pretty much what we've done here, and I think we're all set to drop in today's food. So let's move on. We've got what we had collected here, not only the residual top covering pieces of paper that we encountered when we first got in here, but a piece of leftover banana stem. So let's drop that in here and then get these leftovers in there as well. And this is where I'm questioning my approach as to separating the nice fresh strawberries and carrots from the leftovers using this paper here. I wonder if that's just going to result in the leftovers being ignored down low. But I guess we'll have to see next time we come back in here. Now, did I do a good job divvying the food up here? I hope so. It appears that we've been fair in giving each system approximately the same amount of stuff. It does seem like what the other bin got was mainly just the tops of carrots and the leaves, whereas this system seems to be getting a whole bunch of actual whole strawberries. So maybe we're not being that fair. But we tried. I don't think anyone's keeping score, so we don't have to worry about it from that point of view. Yeah, I'm going to use the feeding zone indicator that we're going to deploy momentarily as a way to just get some of this moisture and residue off my glove and back down into the system. And then we can give them a nice day's worth of coffee and worm chow. And then we'll be finished. Alright, so I am curious to see what people think about this system. Everyone did seem to be entirely on board during the last check-in on the whole concept of this system being ready for harvest, or at least initiating the steps that drive towards harvest of the castings and extraction of the worms and relocation of the worms. But hopefully I've rationalized this correctly in my mind in terms of why I should just go a little longer, and I don't think there's any great harm in going a little longer. So it's definitely in the cards for these guys, definitely in the cards for them in the very near future. And sometimes I just wonder if maybe it's just in the back of my head. I'm like maybe thinking to myself that, oh my goodness, if I were to harvest yet another batch of worms, where am I going to put them? I don't have bus bins to put them into. What am I going to use as a home for them? Because that is kind of one of my constraints here, so that always has to factor in a little bit in the back of my mind as well. So maybe that's just the reason I'm letting them hang out in this stuff a little bit longer before we, move ahead to the next step, which will at some point be to get the worms out of here, get them somewhere new, and get their nice beautiful castings put into storage in preparation for the upcoming gardening season. All right, everyone, that was fun. Always fun to check in on these two systems. They're doing so good. But that's it. We're done here. Before I go there really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.